Hello, everybody. This is the 57th call of the Amazon Investor Coalition Call-in Podcast Series. We are dedicated to advancing forest-friendly economic development and the rule of law across the Amazon region of South America. We're supported by Nexus and the Global Governance Philanthropy Network. And this week we are featuring the work of Anya Prusa and the Brazil Institute of the Wilson Center. Anya, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Jen. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone today.
And tell us a little bit about you. Where are you joining us from? And tell us a little bit about your life before you became the think tanker, which is the Brazil Institute.
So I am actually joining you from the Wilson Center itself on 1300 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. It's my first day back in the office in about a year. So you guys are lucky you're getting the full office set up behind me. We at the Wilson Center are fortunate, I think, in our location. We're located right between the White House and Congress on Pennsylvania Avenue, so really at the heart of the DC policy environment. And I came to the Wilson Center after, a short stint in the US government. I worked in the Office of Brazil and Southern Cone Affairs for a year and a half. Then spent 2 years in Brazil, came back to DC, got a master's in public policy and spent a year with the Albright Stonebridge Group, so more on the private sector side, which I think really opened my eyes to the role of the private sector and private investment when it comes to, international relations, honestly, and commercial diplomacy. And that's how I ended up back at the Wilson Center. We obviously do a lot of work focused on research and putting out publications and events. But a key component of our work is also trying to create a forum where people with different perspectives and different experiences can come together, right? And try to have conversations that are tackling some of the really challenging issues of our day. And climate change and sustainability is obviously one of them.
Walk us through a little bit of what life is like as a Brazil-focused think tank in Washington, D.C. And what are the institutions? We're familiar, of course, with USAID and the White House and not the Department of Foreign Affairs, wrong country, Jonah, the State Department, and then, of course, the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility. But who are the other think tanks that are sort of in your lane? Tell us a little bit about the ecosystem and then the special relationship that you guys have with that ecosystem and your relationship with the White House.
Yeah. So DC, there's many think tanks in DC, but surprisingly few that focus on Latin America and even fewer that really touch on Brazil. The Brazil Institute is the only, in fact, Brazil-focused institute within a think tank within DC. So, in terms of some of the other think tanks that, we partner with or compete with from time to time, it would be the Inter-American Dialogue. CSIS is kind of rebuilding their Brazil program at the moment. And I would say the Atlantic Council as well. There's a lot of work on Latin America and Brazil as well. So, if you're looking at think tanks in Brazil, it is, quite a small community here in DC. The Brazil Institute itself has been around since 2006, and our roots go back even further. The Wilson Center was founded and chartered by the US Congress in 1968. And so we are, a nonprofit, a think tank, right? But we are also a part of the US government. We're essentially a public-private partnership. And because of that, we have a really unique position in DC. And we have a lot of access to the US Congress and to other, other elements of the interagency community. Our mission is really to come up with policy ideas and research to help inform US policymakers, as well as policymakers around the world. And so that is very much at the core of what we do. In fact, the Wilson Center was named after President Woodrow Wilson because he was the only US president to have a PhD. And so instead of, a statue or a monument on the Washington Mall, his, presidential memorial is actually a think tank, right? A temple to scholarship, if you will. So we take that very seriously. We are strictly nonpartisan. Our goal is, as one of our former presidents used to say, to cast light, not heat. We really want to bring, clarity and create, this safe forum. That said, we are nonpartisan. We do try to, showcase all sides. But we are a research institute, right? So we do that grounded in fact and grounded in scientific evidence. And when it comes to climate change, even within the US policy environment, that can still be a bit contentious. And for us, we very much follow the science when it comes to climate change and sustainability work.
Tell us a little bit about your relationship with the White House.
So we, basically, the Wilson Center Board of Trustees, it's nominated by the White House, by the president, technically. The chair of our board is a presidential appointment, and members of our Board of Trustees include, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Commerce, et cetera. So we tend to, I think have a fair amount of dialogue, I would say, with folks on the National Security Council and the agencies as well. We've been fortunate, to host in the past US vice presidents and other high-level dignitaries. But, we very much value our independence, I would say. So we're definitely a resource. And, for us, it's important to know what the White House is thinking. We obviously are incorporating that into our analysis. And we're hoping that our research will prove useful to them as well. But we are not, shall I say, a research entity for the White House, if that makes sense.
Sure. Can you tell us a little bit about the Brazil-US dialogue that you guys have been facilitating?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jonah. We back in 2020, once, current President Joe Biden was elected, it was very clear, right, that climate change and sustainability was going to be very high on the agenda for the US president. And we really wanted to do what we could to try to make sure that that conversation was as productive as possible. We knew obviously that, the US federal government would be talking with the Brazilian federal government, but we at the Brazil Institute feel very strongly that the dialogue needs to be bigger than that. That climate change is a challenge for our societies, not just for our governments. And so we started talking with Uma Concertação pela Amazônia, which is a group of civil society and business leaders in Brazil who, are similarly looking for a sustainable way forward in the Amazon. So we partnered with them to create this dialogue, which brings together, 50 or 60 members on both Brazil and the United States. So it's bilateral. Our meetings are held mostly in English, but we provide Portuguese translation, and some of the folks do speak in Portuguese as well. And the goal is to, over the series of these meetings, starting this year and going into next year and hopefully well into the future, tackle some of the big questions that remain unresolved on the climate change agenda and the sustainability agenda between our two countries. This is a non-governmental dialogue. We're very much seeking to build ties and build connections between business and between civil society on both sides, but also facilitate, this taking advantage, right, of the broad range and depth of expertise in Brazil and in the United States to identify some of these pressing issues and start thinking about, what are the things that policymakers here in the US, but also in Brazil, what are the things that they need to consider as they're moving towards COP26 and beyond? So our first meeting on July 26th, we focused specifically on the issues of carbon markets and, what is the approach as we head towards COP26? What should the United States and Brazil be thinking about? One of our key conclusions, right? And I don't think this will come as a surprise to any of you, right? This is the Amazon Investor Coalition, is that there needs to be investment. Brazil can't go it alone. This is an area where the United States and other members of the international community, as well as the international business community, can really make a big difference in terms of helping get investment to the folks who need it in Brazil. But the parallel is that there have to be mechanisms for that investment to arrive. And I know, Jonah, that this has been an ongoing conversation that you've been having, right? Where it can be challenging if you're not in Brazil, if you don't have local connections to figure out how to invest. I know we have Alexandre on the call with USAID, and so he can certainly speak to this as well. He's done a lot of great work in this area. But it does remain, right? This challenge is, I think there's a lot of folks, as this call can attest, who want to make a difference. And so the challenge is, how do you funnel that investment, at the scale that is required, and with, kind of the transparency and the environmental integrity that we need to actually make a difference.
Let's get a little bit into the carbon piece. The LEAF Coalition, which includes the UK government and the US government and Norway, maybe Germany was involved too, along with maybe 10 different private companies, announced $1 billion available for jurisdiction level approaches to carbon credits. I understand that there was some feature on this in one of your recent calls. What did you learn? What are you guys learning? What can we expect for future collaboration between project level and jurisdiction level carbon financing mechanisms?
Yeah, so the LEAF Coalition, obviously the initial, proposals have been submitted. The folks who are kind of responsible for implementing and overseeing the emergent is still in the process of reviewing those applications. So they are in touch with the applicants, but as of right now, there's nothing publicly that they can share right on the status. One of the I think challenges that I've been hearing when it comes to LEAF, or at least this initial round of LEAF, was the short time frame for governments to submit, right? So LEAF requires that you submit at a jurisdictional level. So that can be at a state, at a region, or at a national level. And the reason they do that, there's a couple of reasons, right? One is simply it's a question of scale. They really do want to encourage large scale coordinated efforts. And another reason is that it makes it, in some ways, doing it at a jurisdictional level helps address some of the problems of leakage that you might see, right? Where if you're focused on just a project, you might preserve, a small section of the Amazon, but then deforestation might simply shift, 50 kilometers over. And so the goal with the jurisdictional level is to kind of carve out, right, a large chunk of territory that you can monitor. So, they're in the process right now of reviewing the applications. They are in contact, right, with the Amazon states that have submitted those proposals and are kind of working their way through that. But I would say LEAF, in some ways, LEAF is also a longer term initiative, right? We're in the first round. And just to back it up, right, the way LEAF works is that, the Amazon states submit their proposals, for example, and if they're accepted, right, if they meet the criteria, then, theoretically, they will be able to sell carbon credits through the LEAF marketplace. So LEAF is essentially establishing this mechanism, right, to sell carbon credits. And the companies that have partnered, that are working with LEAF, will be the ones who are buying those carbon credits from the Amazon states, for example. But, the first round of projects that would be able to sell carbon credits, kind of won't be wrapped up until the end of next year. And so, then there still has to be this evaluation period and the monitoring, right, to measure that the carbon offsets were actually what they were supposed to be. And so, it will be a while before states start seeing the money from the LEAF Coalition. Like, this isn't It's not like, yay, you're in the program, you're going to start seeing money right off the bat. And so I think one of the big questions that you hear is, these bigger efforts, once they get up and running, there's real potential to see a lot of resources flowing through them. But while we're in the startup phase, there's kind of a gap where there is a need for investment right now, even if it's maybe smaller scale investment, to kind of help these states stand up some of these projects and stand up some of the programs that they need. One of the issues, with LEAF is that it only provides funding for deforestation reduction or degradation reduction, right, or reforestation activity, right? It's for those activities itself. LEAF doesn't provide any sort of funding for capacity building or training or, assistance for the states who might need help, creating a project, designing a project. None of that is going to be funded through LEAF. And so one of the big questions right now is how do you help the states do this? A lot of the states in Amazonia, they're relatively small governments. They might not have a lot of resources or technical capacity at their disposal. And so even, putting together a proposal, applying for money from the LEAF Coalition, that itself can be a hurdle. So one of the questions for us, as funders or as the international community or as researchers at a think tank is how do you create mechanisms that can be in parallel to LEAF to help provide some of this capacity building, at the beginning.
Just a couple more questions from me, and then we're going to open it up to the rest of the audience. So let's rewind about a year ago. Bernie Sanders and Biden were in a debate with each other, and Biden throws out this number for the Amazon, $20 billion. And the people that I'm speaking to in diverse parts of the US government say that deliberation process is now in the US Treasury. I'm wondering, what is the US government going to do with $20 billion, or who are they going to mobilize it from? What's the strategy? I'm wondering what insight you might have about what Treasury is up to.
Well, first of all, I would say that any sort of money from the US government, it takes time, right? The US government is a large bureaucracy, and so that's not going to happen immediately. There was a, executive order issued by President Biden this spring that basically tasked Treasury with kind of coming up with and coordinating, right, a US response when it comes to financing sustainable development in the Amazon region and financing forest protection. And what the US Treasury, I think, is really looking at is, how do you create self-sustaining projects in the Amazon, right? How do you create a system? How do you finance that transition such that you have a green economy that can support itself going forward? And this was a discussion that we had with our Brazil-US Dialogue partners, right? If you're thinking about the future of the Amazon, it can't be a question of philanthropy, right? It has to be one of investment. It has to be one of changing the economic system that is in place and generating new economic models that preserve the forest while providing a livelihood for people going forward. And so, from my conversations with the Treasury Department, that really is their focus, figuring out how to do that. And they're looking for examples of projects that work, right? Ideas that have shown promise that can be scaled up going forward.
Great. Well, we all look forward to to seeing the news when it comes out, and elevating the voices of anyone who has those answers. Many on this.
And I would add, Jonah, that I think the role of the U.S. government to some extent is going to be less about direct U.S. monetary assistance, and there will be some of that, of course. But also creating mechanisms where private sector capital can flow in and make a difference as well.
Okay, one last question for me, and then we'll bring it to the audience, and John Bruno will be up first. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of your previous research? I remember seeing articles on land grabbing and COVID-19, and what more would you like to share?
Yeah. So, the environment has obviously been a huge part of our work at the Brazil Institute since we were founded, given the importance of the Amazon to Brazil and to the world. And so this is something we've been watching for a while. And I would say over the last year or two, it has definitely become more and more of a focus for us. A lot of our research, I think, has been less on the science side. I mean, we have partnered with Carlos Nobri. Thomas Lovejoy is a member of our board, right? Really excellent scientists who are doing very important work, helping us understand the situation and the risks, right, that we're all facing. But for us at the Brazil Institute, our bigger question is why is deforestation continuing to happen? And what are some of the policy solutions to deforestation? And so we've looked at, issues of illicit activities, mining, illicit timber, some of the criminal organizations, right, that are operating in the Amazon. That's an area where I'm hoping to do an event or something on the illicit economy later this year. And then also looking at how, poverty and kind of a lack of economic alternatives is also shaping the choices that people are making in the Amazon. The way we see it, the Amazon, deforestation in the Amazon, it's a problem because of individual incentives and because of the incentives of the system. If you're looking at the prices of land, right, the fact that it is essentially cheaper to clear forested land than to buy, already cleared land. Forested land is seen as unproductive, and so it has less value. And these sorts of things are structural, right? And Brazil made a lot of progress, in the 2000s at enforcement, at monitoring, at changing some of these dynamics. And I think in recent years, and this predates the Bolsonaro government as well. I mean, I think some of his rhetoric certainly hasn't helped. And, this decision to kind of move enforcement from IBAMA, which has a lot of expertise in this area, to the military, which didn't have the training background, certainly hasn't helped. But for us, trying to just understand why has deforestation been such a persistent problem, and how can you, through policy decisions and policy changes, kind of reshape the economic calculus at both the individual level, at the corporate level, and then at the state level.
Thank you. Okay, first up is John Bruno, and then Natalie Unterstel and Marina Campos. John, you're up first.
Hi, Anya, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm the executive director of the International Ecotourism Society, and so we're part of the sustainable economy. And I know, I'm sure you've done a lot of field work, and everyone on the call has as well. And one of the things that I first want to commend you for is being nonpartisan, because those of us at the middle level are kind of sick of getting whipped back and forth, and with each administration. So it's wonderful to see that you guys are focusing on sustainability, which is continuing to build around the world. If I can put in a plug for it really quickly. But what I wanted to ask is, if you've done a lot of field work, and I'm sure you have, and everyone on the call has, you begin to find out that capacity building is maybe more important than funding, that the community understands what to do with the funding and what their purpose is integrated into their own desires and goals. So my simple question is, how does that get left to the end? I work with USAIDs and groups like yours and very large NGOs and things, and it always puzzles me. So if I individually could put in a suggestion, if there's a box somewhere for suggestions, to put that earlier in the process, maybe, and maybe get some insight from you on how you expect to answer the question that you just laid out, which is those things that are so necessary as part of the ecosystem of successful green finance. When do they get the priority that I think, all of us think they probably need? Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think that's an excellent point. And I should say that we very much are looking for suggestions and ideas. We'll be putting out a report towards the end of this year with our, recommendations for policymakers in Brazil and the United States on, kind of going forward, right? How do you do sustainable investment in the Amazon, sustainable development in the Amazon? And so, for folks who are on this call, if you have ideas or suggestions or questions that we should be looking into, please do raise them, because those will all be kind of incorporated into the work that we're doing. On the question of capacity building, to be honest, we at the Brazil Institute haven't done a ton of work in that space. If I could, point to Alexandre, I know he has done some work with USAID. So if he wants to chime in, I would certainly welcome that. But I do think it is incredibly important. And, one of our recommendations, right, as part of this process to US policymakers in particular, is going to be, don't neglect that side of things, because I think the US has, a lot of ability to provide technical assistance and capacity building. And, in some ways that might be easier than direct funding. That might require, congressional approval. And so that's an area where we think the United States and other international actors can play an enormous role. And you're right, John. I mean, that needs to be part of the conversation from the beginning, right? With the LEAF coefficient, the fact that, it was this huge initiative just, rolled out, and it's incredibly exciting. But the fact that, the capacity of individual jurisdictions to apply and to go through all the technical requirements, to put together a solid technical proposal, that wasn't, thought of in advance as being a potential hurdle. I think, it is a question. It is, to me, an issue, right, that we, within the policymaking community, need to do better on. So it's something that I don't have a great answer for. But we're going to be recommending that the US government take a much closer look at that.
Great. Alexandre, did you want to just add a sentence to this?
Yes, thank you. It's great to see you, Anya. Great presentation. Thanks for sharing all that. That's very important. Here at USA Brazil, we are trying to take a different approach from the way we've been doing traditional development here. And that means look to the Amazon into, continue to look as we've been doing, dealing with the federal government, but now also addressing the challenge, looking to the states as well. So subnational in terms of capacity building is really really related, we think, and each state in the Amazon region is different, very different. So they have their own challenges and opportunities, and in different people, in different cultures. So we're trying to do that by addressing, for instance, and developing the partnership platform for the Amazon, the PPA, where we bring the private sector to be, the front runner and the leaders of this collective action platform. But I totally understand and agree with that approach, and we're trying to address that by doing different, trying to do different, continue to do the same thing as we've been doing for years, but also adding to that a different approach and trying to get really close to the states of the Amazon regions and understand their different challenges. Over.
Great.
And
Thank you, Go ahead.
I would just add really quick that with the LEAF Coalition, Emergent and the folks who are leading that initiative are aware that capacity building is, needs to be a part of it. And so they are, working to potentially set up like a third-party international organization or NGO that could help handle that side, in part because if you are an Amazon state governor and you're going to be graded against US criteria on whether you get into that program or not, is it entirely fair that it's a US government representative who's consulting with you, right? Since the US has an interest in you participating. So it might be better to have a more neutral third party providing advice. not to say that the USG wouldn't be fair, but having a neutral party available, we think would be good.
I'm going to call on Natalie Unterstel next. Right before Natalie comes on, I just want to invite everybody to post their names and their email addresses and LinkedIn's, if you want, in the chat to facilitate follow-up. One of the most important things that comes out of these calls is the networking. Alexandra, you're a super important resource for lots of new investors and donors and governments that want to come to the Amazon region. So I really want to encourage you to put down your email for others to follow up. Okay, Natalie.
Hi, Juna. Good to see you. Good to see a few familiar faces here today, but also to get to know new ones. So thank you for inviting me. It's been a while that I could not join you. So happy to be here today. So Anya, I have actually a question, and I would also like to share a reflection about the LEAF program. But my question to you is more on your take on the USA's position on carbon markets, Article 6 for Glasgow. So how do you see the US moving forward with this, particularly any insights around forests? Which are not explicitly addressed through Article 6, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and how do you see Brazil and US relationship evolving around this? And as a reflection, just because I found very interesting this dialogue that you just established with John Bruno on capacity building and trying to build up institutions and systems. I really commend everybody that is involved in the LEAF program. I even wrote a piece for America's Quarterly on that. I think it's a great initiative. But something that I'm grappling still with is why had we, as a international community, started it all over again? 10 years ago, we agreed upon REDD+ Warsaw mechanism. It took us years. Marina knows that very well. There were nights and nights of negotiations that, So, and then the Green Climate Fund has a well-established mechanism working for both nations and jurisdictions that is being used. So even Argentina got almost $100 million through that mechanism, not to mention Brazil and others. And once again, we have this appetite, this time from 10 companies, $1 billion, etc., few governments too. But we are kind of, repeating the thing. Every 10 years, we have this resolution of let's start it all over again. So I wanted to share that reflection, not to make this a negative, critique of the LEAF per se, but as a reflection for all of us, what could have we, done differently, or what can we do differently from now on, instead of just, multiplying or not even replicating, it's repeating the things that we've done in the past. So these are my two questions or comments to you. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. I think, your comment on how do we build on what's been done rather than just replicate it is so important. There's a tendency, right, of and I'm hesitant to say it's all because of politics, but, there's this tendency to want to launch big initiatives. And I think get, both the attention that comes with it, because, attention helps you drive change, honestly. But also, to show that you're doing something. And so I think LEAF is in some ways a response to the desire to show that something is being done. That said, it is doing something, right? It is mobilizing a large amount of capital. And I think if you were to talk with the people who helped, create LEAF, they would tell you they wanted to raise the standards. That REDD+ has been, a success on many fronts, but that their goal is to have, even more accountability and to kind of raise the ambition of this moment. And that LEAF is intended to help drive that conversation forward. So those would be my 2 cents on why LEAF. In terms of carbon markets, the United States, obviously in its NDC, is not relying on carbon credits, right, to meet its goals. And there has been a lot of questions on where the US will come down on the carbon market debate at COP26. To be honest, I don't know what the answer is. I know the US government sees carbon markets as being, very important to kind of solving the climate change debate and to providing financing, especially to developing countries and especially for forest protection. So they do see it as an important mechanism. And I think there will be a push by the US government to ensure that this is seen as a path forward. But in terms of like a specific negotiating position, I don't have details on that.
Oh, inside baseball. We want inside baseball. Marina,
Yeah.
you're up next.
Thank you so much, Anya. It's very nice to meet you and then to know more about the Winslow Center. I had the chance to go to some of the lectures there, but I didn't know the history. So thank you so much. This is it's very great to know that there is this institute there. So Morn is not much of a question, but it's along the same lines what Natalie was saying. So about 13 years ago in the state of Amazonas, we created the first payment for environmental services there, which was called Bolsa Floresta. It has its own complications and challenges and opportunities, but if there's something we learned through this process, and let's be really honest, is that the transition costs of establishing this kind of mechanisms are huge. So what happens is then the money who gets into the ground trickles or drops, right? So what I'm saying is not a criticizing LEAF or any kind of carbon markets or anything, but we gotta be smarter and create more creative ways that this money that reaches the ground, that doesn't require all these different agencies to put their seal that was approved, and this is the scheme, is the R3, this is whatever, because we lost so much money in these transactions. And I understand you need to be transparent, you need protocols, you need all of this, but at the end of the day, the money needs to reach the forest. Otherwise it's lost it's in the middle. So I don't know, I'm not asking you to solve this question, but I think we do have to, it's very important to think about this track. And I commend you and other people that are doing this, but let's think about other ways too. That's all what I'm saying.
Thank you, Marina. I think that's a really, really important point, right? At the end of the day, you don't want to be funding middlemen or, verifiers. You need the money to actually go to, the millions of people in the Amazon, right? And to kind of support them and create a transition for them. One of our focus areas with the dialogue, which we'll be discussing more and more as we head towards COP26, is ensuring the participation of Indigenous communities and other traditional communities, not just in conversations surrounding this, but actually making sure that money is reaching them as well. So I don't have an answer, but it's certainly on our radar as something that's really important. And your point, it's very well made. I've written it down so that I'll make sure we we raise that in our meetings as well.
Next up is Gustavo.
Just a second, and as Natalie said, let's learn from the things we already did. Let's really not forget that a lot of stuff has been done. And you just need to research that rather than starting from scratch. Like readiness, for example, became a very important part of the RED project, and then LEAF doesn't have the readiness part. So anyway, just some things for us to learn.
Well said. Gustavo's up next. If others have other comments or questions, please indicate your interest in the chat. Go ahead, Gustavo.
Thank you, Jonah, and nice to meet you, Anya, and thank you for your conversation, not presentation, but it is a very interesting conversation, this one, and I think from John Bruno point on capacity building, to the highlights Marina now brings of us learning from those lessons of things that worked and worked, some of them at scale in the Amazon in the past, in a very recent past. So it is indeed necessary to bring all those lessons to the table. But and of course, I agree with you that of course we want to fund the impact on the ground and not the middleman. But more like your opinion, don't you see room for more institutions to actually deploy this to the ground? Because this is something we've been discussing, especially in climate finance for transitioning energy, for instance, and we know like multilaterals, despite of the fact that they are doing their best, they are not managing to deploy funding at scale. Would that be the same like for forestry, in your opinion?
In the sense that multilaterals aren't able to deploy funding to the projects? Or
Yeah, that it does not happen at scale and at that speed that is needed, and especially in the Amazonian landscape where you have like a capillarity challenge also, and much smaller scale stakeholders in the ground. So to reach them for large multilateral institutions is very difficult.
yes, I agree 100%. One of the frequent questions I honestly get in conversations with US stakeholders is, how do we invest? Who do we go to? Who do we talk to in the Amazon to find investable projects? And there's certainly work being done to build a pipeline. But if you look at Brazil and you look at like the pipeline of energy projects, right, it is at much larger scale, much more transparent. It's much easier to get the details. And as of yet, there isn't really a comparable pipeline of projects, right, for sustainable development in the Amazon. I think, one method, honestly, is to have, you can have, local NGOs or other organizations that serve as intermediaries. There have been, as I'm sure you know, NGOs doing this, right, where they have a group of individual projects. It might be individual businesses or small scale farms or cooperatives, and that they then serve as an intermediary, right, and help talk with the international organizations, with the donors. And then, on the flip side, they're doing some of the capacity building and the training for the individual stakeholders, right, in the Amazon. And so I think when we're saying, well, we don't want to fund the middlemen, I think it's important to make a distinction between, organizations that are building capacity and are moving resources through to the actors on the ground. Those are incredibly important to fund and to support because they do take, all of these tiny little projects and they combine them into something that becomes investable at a larger scale, right? I think where we have to be careful is, are we funding, capacity building and projects that are reaching people on the ground, or is it just stopping, with that middle organization? And I think that's where it's really important that we do make sure, right, that the resources are passing all the way through. Maybe not 100%, right? Because you do have to pay the people who are providing capacity building and training and serving as the bridge. But we want to make sure that, this transition isn't being imposed. It's being developed in cooperation with local residents and local stakeholders. And that they, are receiving, not just funding, but the ability to participate in, a more global, more sustainable economic model. Does that answer your question?
Okay, Bharat. Thank you, Gustavo. Bharat, you're up next.
Thank you very much, Jonah, and thanks to everybody here today. Anya, thank you very much for your conversation pieces and answers up to now. So I'm going to be not controversial, but I'm just going to ask a question. Is there another way to finance the conservation and the protection of Amazonia without actually going into the carbon markets and carbon credits? Now, I run the investment unit for Top Tier Impact, which is a global impact consultancy and investment community. Now, we've been looking at climate finance, we're looking at green finance for the last 6 months. And my personal opinion is, I mean, thank you for the Leaf Coalition, looking into it while we were speaking and listening to you. I just get the feeling that this is again a $1 billion a greenwashing enterprise, you know, which is backed by a lot of governments. And I appreciate you may, because of your particular position, not be able to answer yes or no to this. But is there another way to actually finance this without going into carbon credits? Because I just get the feeling there's a lot of studies being done, and not just by the Guardian newspaper in the UK, about carbon credits really not actually addressing the fundamental issues that we have, not just in Amazonia, but around the planet as well.
I think, you know, it's been one of the big questions about carbon credits, because in order to, you know, make sure that those credits are actually financing real changes, actually contributing to, you know, over time reducing greenhouse gas emissions, you do have to have, you know, I think very good monitoring and evaluation, as well as accountability, right? To make sure that those credits are being counted properly and not being double counted. And so that has certainly been a huge challenge, and it's definitely going to be a topic of conversation in Glasgow in November. One of the things about LEAF and, you know, the gold standard and some of these other, you know, carbon verification programs is that they really do seek to have a clear criteria for how do you measure the carbon that's being avoided, and how do you then turn that into a convertible unit, right, that's comparable. And that's also been one of the questions, right? Can you compare carbon from, you know, avoiding deforestation loss to carbon from, you know, changes in the energy sector? You know, having that convertibility is going to be key to making carbon markets, I think, work globally. So these are really big questions, and you know, like the ART-TREE standard, you know, is developed to try to deal with them. A lot of it's going to come down to implementation, though, and how well, you know, these standards are actually being applied on the ground. As far as the LEAF Coalition, that remains to be seen, right? They haven't even approved and selected the projects yet, so we don't know how well it will be applied. But, you know, there are certainly people who are very focused on making sure that it is a credible program, that there is integrity in the results. So I do think, you know, it's a very valid concern, and I would just say not all carbon credits are equal. And that's one of the big questions for all of us who are looking at carbon credits as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions going forward. Like, how do you make sure that you're actually reducing?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, okay, up next is Luciana.
Hi, Anya. I just want to put a different perspective from our work, which is human rights focused, and has emphasized, I mean, particularly since Bolsonaro took office, the extent to which the government has sabotaged environmental law enforcement in the Amazon. And we think, I mean, economic development, you know, it's just not, is not part of our particular mandate, right? Like what we're doing is exposing human rights abuses in the region, and how the government has responsibility for those, either by being complicit in them or just enabling them by not enforcing their own laws. So we don't have a mandate that is specifically to advance economic development in the country. But obviously, like, we see it as being part of the solution, and how can it be done in a sustainable way? But we find it's really difficult to kind of promote these opportunities in Brazil when it's so evident I mean, for anybody who I think has done field research in the Amazon region, that, you know, characterizing it as the Wild Wild West is not terribly exaggerated. So I'm curious to hear how this topic may have come up in your conversations with US officials, and how are they trying to kind of account and mitigate for these risks that arise from a government that's simply not interested in enforcing environmental laws or protecting environmental defenders or indigenous communities trying to defend the rainforest.
You know, what I would say is that within the US government, there is a real commitment to doing what they can to support indigenous rights and human rights in the Amazon region, right? That is something that I think is very, you know, it's a true belief, right? It's firmly held. The question is how do you go about that? And what levers can you bring to bear, right? And I say this as a non-US government employee. I should, full disclaimer, I'm on the nonprofit side of the Wilson Center, so I'm not actually a federal employee, although some of my colleagues are. I think, you know, the emphasis on sustainable development, there have to be safeguards, right? If you're providing funding or if you're providing capacity building, there ought to be safeguards attached that are, you know, dependent on, you know, certain laws being enforced and certain protections, which are part of Brazilian law being provided for, right? And that includes, you know, territorial demarcation for indigenous, you know, traditional indigenous lands. We've been seeing the debate, right, the Marco Temporal before the Supreme Court. And we know, you know, there have been studies that, you know, indigenous communities with the legal right to their land, those lands are more protected and they're less deforested, right? So there's a clear environmental imperative to this as well. It's all linked. So I think for our work, you know, when it comes to human rights, it's very important to us that indigenous groups are at the table and that their voices are being heard and incorporated. And that when there is investment, you know, whether it's through the LEAF Coalition or through alternate mechanisms, that attention is being paid to human rights safeguards and territorial safeguards as well.
I want to invite some others who are on the call to perhaps respond to this. How can you have economic development without the rule of law? What can you do when the rule of law in a country is systematically dismantled? There are platforms for international law. Julia, could you tell us a little bit about the Foundation for the International Law of the Environment, why it was created, some of what your future hopes are? I think it's relevant.
Sure. So we are developing this strategy, and one way for doing this is through litigation. And here in Brazil, we have an organization that is key in this issue, which is IX. And of course, that with strategic legal actions, we don't only include litigation, but it is actually growing in Brazil. And we also include, for example, legal opinions that in advocacy actions, I guess that we can use law in this sense, through advocacy, litigation, legal opinions.
Great. We have a couple minutes left. People have posted a couple links. Feel free, folks, to come off mic and comment. Come off mute. Anya, did you want to add anything more?
I think I would just add, you know, that I really appreciate everyone's comments today. It's been, you know, a pleasure to talk with all of you. And I think the points you've raised are all very important ones. And, you know, points that I will be taking, right, and using to inform our work at the Brazil Institute going forward. So I dropped my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out if you want to, you know, follow up or dialogue. We host a number of events and private roundtables, and we are a think tank, so we're always looking for ideas and for thought leaders to kind of contribute to our own work.
Gustavo, do you want to mention the Climate Law Initiative?
No, I was just commenting I don't lead it. It's under Caio Borges, my colleague, who works closely to Julia, and there are various initiatives in Brazil. In Brazil, there is a new way of acting in climate, I would say, despite the fact that there are litigation and other legal challenges being used by civil society in many other areas. But in climate, something we still have a journey to go through as courts, judges, prosecutors, and even lawyers are just starting to learn the potential of using the courts as a way to enforce climate compliance and Paris compliance, especially in Brazil, that is a country where the Congress has ratified the Paris Agreement. So for us, it is in fact law.
Okay, we have reached the top of the hour. Anya, you have been a wonderful guest. This is now where we switch over to water cooler time. A number of people leave the call, but I will be leaving the room open and we can have unstructured conversations. Anya, are you available to stay around for a couple minutes?
Yeah, happy to stay around.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks everybody, and class is dismissed, but Anya's here for office hours. Thanks everybody.
I would love to hear if there's any responses to what I said or any thoughts, anyone who disagrees. We're always open to, to different viewpoints.
Thank you so very much. We're still being recorded though here. It's Fiona. I will come back in and say hi.
Okay.
Yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, example, like here at New York at the Climate Week opening, there's all these great companies saying they've joined the LEAF Coalition. My friends work for the LEAF Coalition as well. And it's an idea, but the question is how quickly or effective is this going to be to actually meet any of the 2030 goals? And then on top of that is how is it trickling down? Because the need to do this is not for the Indigenous people. It's not run by them. It's not actually in their format, in what I'm understanding is their requests of what they would like to participate in as well. So I'm open to learning how we can help to activate projects that would represent multi-stakeholders and multi-opportunities for them in the urgency that we're in right now. Thank you. It's Fiona. And we're here in New York in case anybody's here. We're representing the Act Now Amazonas Action Alliance team that is rainforest for the Rainforest X Prize as a chosen team, as well as we're in the part of the World Economic Forum Trillion Trees initiative as well. So happy for anybody's answers as well. Thank you. And thank you, Jonah, always.
Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. As far as the LEAF Coalition goes, once Emergent, which is the operational company right behind the LEAF Coalition, once they've announced, the jurisdictions that are selected, I think that's when a lot of the real work is going to start in actually figuring out what the specific projects look like, where exactly the money's going to go. The jurisdictions had, I think, just like 2 months to put together their proposals. And so these proposals are very much at the 10,000 foot level. And over the next 6 months to a year, I would say, is when they'll be figuring out what that really looks like on the ground. So there is still a lot of space for NGOs and for other actors to inform, what that looks like. And I think active participation and engagement is going to be crucial to making sure that these projects are effective and addressing the needs of many stakeholders on the ground.
Bharat and Deborah, I noticed you're off mute. Did you guys want to say something?
I actually just noticed the time and I have to hop, but hi, Jonah, thank you very much for this. And Bharat and I connected
Yeah.
bilaterally, but I just wanted to share the work that we're doing. I know you're familiar with it, Jonah, but we need to catch up on it in the region around identifying the climate solutions. Unfortunately, I have to hop right now because I'm late for this other call.
Okay,
But
we'll follow
I
up.
will follow up. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Hi.
Bharat, did you want to?
Yeah, just one
Yeah,
thing
go for
that I picked up on before the question started was, Anya, you mentioned that there is a gap in funding at the moment. Is that right? For certain projects on the ground, before before LEAF comes in and before, you guys, USA goes in or what have you. There's a certain gap at the moment. I just wanted to see if you could tell more about that.
Yeah, so what we're seeing, right, is that obviously there is some money already coming in, but when I'm talking, I'm honestly talking at kind of a general level, right? Like I don't
Sure.
know specific projects that need the money. What I've been hearing from talking to people on the ground and from NGOs in Brazil is that there is a real need for kind of immediate, smaller scale funding to do like feasibility studies and help stand up projects and do some of the technical design elements, right? And so, once you get that funding, you have a project that then is ready for larger scale investment flows in the future. And so there's this kind of window, right, where immediate smaller amounts of money could actually make a big difference in getting projects ready for larger capital flows in the future.
Right. And where would we find any information on this? Is there any?
I can connect you with a few organizations if you're interested.
Okay.
There's a group called Escolhas. You might know them, Jonah. It's
Instituto Escolhas.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of work looking specifically at how to put it, what makes economic sense in the sustainability space. And so they have a lot of connections with organizations that are doing this on the ground.
Okay, right. Okay, great, thanks.
Go ahead.
Oh, the Amazon, the governor's climate and governor's climate and forest task force also has been doing a lot of work supporting capacity building for the Amazon governors, so they might know of opportunities as well.
I'll go ahead and post the link to the Governor's Climate Forest Task Force. And I can share with you, Bharat, a call where they spoke previously. Bharat, looking at this from a macro level, one of the things that's missing for all the startups from the Amazon region is the traditional financial ecosystem. There are not many private equity players there. And as a result, startups don't have a 3-year horizon till their liquidity event, right? Maybe it's 10 years. And that inadequacy keeps a lot of important actors out. The REDD+ carbon financing spaces is kind of like the Wild West. The $1 billion pledged by the LEAF Coalition is basically that giant liquidity opportunity at the end of the tunnel. And by mobilizing lots of partnerships ahead of that time, you can get the startup, to that liquidity line. It's a lot of work, but there are literally dozens of stakeholders holding some piece of that ecosystem. So great that you're willing to roll up your sleeves, and there's a huge amount to learn. Okay, anybody else? I'm going to go ahead and pull us off of the recording.
Great. Well, thank you all. Always inspiring, Jonah. Just really important.